on the motion that as a teacher from an underprivileged racial/ethnic minority, this house would artificially inflate the grades of students from similarly disadvantaged backgrounds. Let's have proposition one here.
ऑल्सो शिराज बता दो POI इस चैट में चाहिए कि verbally?
Chat में please. Am I good to go?
Yep, you're good to go.
Am I visible and audible?
Yes, you have been for a while now.
I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. A 6-year-old who has to help his sick, ailing mother while juggling studies. A 10-year-old who has to work at a factory for 6 hours while juggling his studies. We think at that point in time, you as a teacher have a moral obligation to help people from your community to make sure that they are successful in life and to make sure that they are doing good. We think at that we have two argumentations for you at side proposition. One, a moral obligation, and secondly, how education is inherently discriminatory and does not allow underprivileged students from minorities to succeed. But before I get into this, some key pieces of characterization. One, what do we think artificial inflation looks like? We think this looks like teachers indiscriminately doing it for everyone. We think currently teachers still have certain metrics to which they base results on, and we think they're likely to use those same metrics. But secondly, we think artificial inflation does not look like you turning C's into A stars, does not look like you turning D's into A stars, etc. We think more accurate representation of what artificial inflation looks like is like you turning C's into B's, you turning A's into B's. We think on our side you won't just alter it, right? We think this looks like you taking into account other things that aren't academics, right? I.e. your class participation, your questions that you ask, your answers, but also how you behave in class, etc. We think this is important because the teachers can then go ahead and justify the grades of these students. But thirdly, we think this will be done in a very safe way. This is important for you to listen to, because any change will be done before you submit those grades in the first place, right? We think this is likely to be done as a preliminary, not after you've submitted the grades. But secondly, we think capacity building mechanisms are likely to be implemented, right? We think this looks like supplementary classes given to these students, but also assignment resubmission or deadline extensions given to these students in that place. For first argument then about moral obligation, before I get to my argumentation, I'll take a PY, please. No PY. First argument then. I'll take you after. First argument then, moral obligation. A couple of premises I want to tackle here. One, principles of affirmative action not only justify this, but make this a necessity. A couple of ideas here I want to tell you about. One, what does affirmative action look like? We think this looks like favoring some individuals from a historically oppressed or marginalized group. But why is this important in this context? This is important because ethnic minorities do not have enough resources. They do not have money. They can't provide food, shelter, and security to their family, right? We're talking about people below the poverty line, people who have been historically neglected, people who the government does not care about. But secondly, we think we're also talking about victims of historical oppression, right? We think this looks like victims of systemic discrimination discrimination in the form of active neglect by the state, right? We think this looks like you not being able to access social mobility, you having certain barriers of entry, but also this looks like you having to face structural barriers which prevent you from succeeding. This also looks like you hitting the glass ceiling within employment, but also in workplaces, etc. We think most of these ethnic groups were also slaves in the past. This looks like Black community being disenfranchised of certain rights within the status quo currently. But thirdly, we think this also looks like contemporary discrimination, right? This looks like racial profiling in literally liberal countries like the United States of America still existing. But we think this also looks like housing, employment, education differences between races still existing within these liberal democracies. But thirdly, we think this also looks like harmful hiring practices or harmful discriminatory hiring practices of companies currently within the status quo. We think every single person believes that affirmative action is universally applicable. This looks like affirmative action in colleges in the United States. We think this is important because this creates equality of opportunity that is previously that these individuals have been previously deprived of. But secondly, these teachers owe a moral, ethical responsibility, and this is important because this is an actor debate panel, and this is very important. They have four ethical responsibilities. One, they have a sense of community and culture. We think this looks like you giving back to the community that raised you. Most ethnic communities have tightly knit communities, right? We think this looks like ethnic communities or groups having already limited resources. And in order for you as a teacher to receive education, we think other people had to make sacrifices. Other people had to contribute to your success. This looks like neighbors or your brothers taking care of your family while you were away. And this is important because this looks like how in the movie 12th Fail, right? When the guy goes out to give his UPSC exam, we think this looks like his neighbors, his brothers, his friends taking care of his family and contributing to his success. His friends actively motivating him to go out and give the exam itself. But secondly, we think teachers have caregiving incentives, right? Every single teacher wants to see their child succeed, right? We think this looks like every single teacher wants to see their child succeed. But they also have empathy because they went through the same similar experiences and the same set of problems that these students are going through currently. But thirdly, they have shared trauma and experiences, right? We think at that point in time, they feel a responsibility to help these individuals. But thirdly, and more importantly, we think at that point in time, they have a position of power, right? This looks like a responsibility to break old destructive cycles of poverty, since you have some sort of socio-economic capital. We think insofar as you have the capacity to do it, we think moral obligation makes sure that insofar as you have the capacity to do it, you should be able to do it. We think, before I go to my second argument, I'll take a few if there's any.
Do you realize how none of the root causes of these communities being disenfranchised are fixed on your side? This is simply a cheat code. How do you fix proper systemic? How do you bring about proper
This is an active debate. Second argument, education is inherently discriminatory and does not allow underprivileged minorities to succeed. A couple of premises I want to tackle here. One, they cannot succeed as educational structures are diametrically opposed to them. This is important in four ways. One, we think education is becoming more and more difficult empirically. Secondly, we think teachers are likely to screw you over. This looks like teachers in, I don't know, white countries or liberal countries actively screwing over Hispanics or actively screwing over Black people within these communities. But thirdly, we think this looks like communication barriers, etc. But fourthly, we think most textbooks are usually written by white patriarchal men. We think this is important insofar as the textbooks that you're reading are actively have a white lens or actively have your oppressor's lens included within them. But fifthly and more importantly, we think this looks like SATs, O levels, which are too standardized and which are not accurate measure of one's intelligence. But secondly, we think the context of these individuals also is important because these are the same individuals who face significant barriers of entry, right? Secondly, who also lack a lot of resources, right? Because they're underprivileged, because they're in the working class, and these students have to pay for their tuition but also take care of their family. But thirdly, other responsibilities that these individuals have, and in this status quo, students also have to be breadwinners and they also have to take care of their ailing mothers. Insofar as I've proven to you, in our world, individuals will be these teachers have a moral obligation to these students, but also they're going to be much better off vote side proposition.
Thank you, Proposition 1, for that fine speech. In order to introduce the clash from the opposition side of the House, I invite opposition's first speaker.
I just need like 15 seconds, please. Okay, good to start.
Yep.
Okay, starting my speech in 3, 2, and 1. Panel, on propositions side, there is a white man called Hassan Ahmed Chaudhry, who's a very hardworking individual, a very hardworking student, somebody that takes school very seriously, right? But there just so happens to be like an African American kid in his A2 class who seems to be marginalized, and he just so happens to have a teacher that, you know, like sympathizes with that student and like gives him or like inflates his grades in the very first place, right? As a result of which, like Hassan Ahmed Chaudhry at proposition couldn't reach the top of his class by and Khan Ahmed Chaudhry did not work hard on their side of the house. That is not to say that he was an incompetent individual, right? That is not to say that he. On our side, we actually protect individuals like Hassan Ahmed Chaudhry, even if they were not disenfranchised in the very first place, right? But then a few pieces of refutations before I move into my positive argumentation. Understand that, yes, thank you for telling us, Shiraz. Ilaf's POI, right? Why does that moral obligation necessarily have to do it like by immoral means or anything, right? I think also, again, like Ilaf also mentioned in her POI, the root cause of the racism and like classism in the status quo. This is simply a cheat code, right? Because a bad debater can use ChatGPT to prep these rounds. Does not fix the fact that they're a bad debater or the fact that a good team will absolutely destroy them, right? That is simply a cheat code for them to be able to gain short-term success, right? While they might be able to give like a seemingly okay 8-minute long speech, again, does not deal with the fact that a good team will absolutely destroy them. But on the principle then, I think teachers have a greater responsibility and be providing fair results to the rest of their students that do work hard, that do not just get an A on the basis of their skin color, right? But I think this is where the straw man are case, because they assume that every black child is somebody that has a sick mother at home or somebody that works 3 jobs panel. That is unfair characterization. We do not buy that characterization, right? But then like giving you like a bit of characterization before moving into my positive argumentation, understand like what the alternative on our side is. Yes, we do recognize that teachers have a moral obligation to their students, but understand that on our obligation to be providing a safe space to their students, and they need to be mobilizing the school internally to create a more inclusive environment and to create an environment that is like an anti-bullying environment, an environment where school does not become like somewhere that these students suffer in the very first place, right? Like an environment where like you give these kids the ability to perform well in the very first place, so they do not have to use these immoral, very basic metrics to judge this debate. Number one, where these like ethnic minority students are bad, quote unquote, the privileged students they talk about on their side are better off, right? But then like on the principle of like the duty of education, understand that like the duty of education as a whole, as a system, is to provide honest and equal assessment of each individual student's abilities and efforts, right? Not just to educate them or to like give them a grade on a test, rather to prepare them for real life circumstances, right? Like to prepare them for what's out there, what's waiting for them in the world. Meaning, and like the reason why you do not, this is why the reason why like a lot of teachers don't allow you to take things like cheat sheets into your exams in the very first place. Like they want an honest assessment of what you have learned and how good your preparation is, right? I think artificially raising means that you do not actually score that high on your test, which means it's unfair, which means the education system is not then awarding effort or merit or hard work, but rather is like then attempting to compensate for systemic issues that exist on their side panel. They are not fixing those systemic issues. They're simply offering a short-term like solution or relief to a problem that requires like long-term solutions in the very first place. But then why is it unfair and unprincipled on their side of the house then? Understand that a non-marginalized student then, like I gave Hassan Ahmed Chaudhry's example at the beginning of my speech, regardless of how hard they work, they will not get the grade that they want, like the grade that the black kid got without studying on their side, right? So I think this is then a disservice to their hard work, which is extremely unfair, because I think like intuitively speaking, hard work is something that absolutely needs to be credited and absolutely like needs to be acknowledged, like, and there's like no debate about that, right? But then also, why is the marginalized student not likely to study on their side of the house? Because they have this like false sense of competence where they know, okay, even if they do not put in effort into their like grades, etc., they're gonna get a good grade. Like for example, I did not study before my English language CIE because I knew even if I didn't study, like I'd get a good grade, right? But then why does this then harm like the marginalized kid on their side of the house? I think that in the future, since this kid has like a false sense of competence, I think that is very actively detrimental to this student's personal and professional like growth, right? Like for example, sure, like inflating their scores might get this kid into university, but I think that like insofar as this student then lands into university, they're going to realize that they're not made out for university, that they do not have like the intelligence to be able to exist within the environment of a university in the very first place, because that is what like there is like middle school, high school experience generally consists of, being given like unfair chances, right? And so they might find themselves at a disadvantage when compared to other kids that are very fairly assessed, right? But then the education system, I think, is not fulfilling their duty on their side, and a teacher is actually being a bad moral actor, like a morally bad actor on their side, because they need to reward all students on the basis of their work fairly, not just like students on the basis of their skin color, right? But then, like, what are the practical harms of this? Understand that then students are very less likely to then be competitive in the real world, since now their grades have been like inflated without merit, right? Like without their hard work and without like what they have done in the very first place, right? And we believe that like real empowerment would mean equipping these students with skills, providing them a safe space to be able to like garnish these skills in the very first place, right? Like to be able to like build upon these skills and to be able to work harder, right? Like to create that environment and empowering them, not misleading them and gaslighting them about their capabilities when that's in fact not the case, right? I think this is also an active disservice to those underprivileged kids, because it's like good in the short term but like bad in the long term, right? This is because like again, like the university example I gave you, when they do not have the necessary knowledge. But also I think in like real life circumstances, like if an employer requires you to do something like and you're not going to be competent enough to do it, I think this is going to create an active erosion of academic standards and trust in the education system on their side of the house. And this like education system actively needs to be fair, because in absence of fairness there would be like way more like rigorous criteria, etc. Like when ISL inflates the grades and like sends false transcripts to like universities, etc., and then like universities know that they have to be more strict, I think that is very likely to happen on their side of the house insofar as fairness does not exist, right? And this is why schools like actively make sure that they do remain fair within their judgments and within their criteria and their transcripts, etc., right? For all those reasons, because no Hassan Ahmed Chaudhry is being harmed on our side of the house, give this debate to.
Thank you, Opposition 1, for that fine speech. In order to carry on with the proposition case, I invite Proposition 2nd speaker.
Yeah, am I audible and visible?
Yep, we're both audible as well.
Okay. I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. So, side opposition within this debate has a particularly amusing strategy. That strategy is, let's just ignore huge swathes of their case, forget about them, and hopefully they will also forget about these parts of their case. I think that when it comes to independently debate-winning arguments, our entire principle went unengaged completely about affirmative action. That is to say, they do not rebut the fact that there's historical oppression that these communities have gone through. They do not rebut the fact that there's contemporary discrimination in terms of affirmative action literally being reversed in places like the United States of America when in educational institutions recently. The things like right-wing wings across Europe, things like Trump getting elected, etc. Real context that exists in the real world that persists today. The fact that redlining happened centuries ago or happened like maybe decades ago, etc., is being reversed right now does not change the fact that educational institutions do not exist within these particular communities in the first place. At the point in time that they don't engage with that meaningfully in any way, we think all of that still stands. But also, they also don't then engage with how the fact that like even if these people wanted to, the system is not meritocratic. That is to say that even if these people put in 120% of their effort, let's say that on a meritocratic basis, they are the hardest workers in their class, in their batch, they're still not going to succeed because the system is rigged against them. That is not just to say that there's discrimination, but there are such implicit biases in educational systems, etc., that have been in place for centuries that still persist. That looks like, for example, textbooks, etc., using the elaborated code. That is a particular form of language that people from underprivileged communities who use restricted codes of language in their homes, etc., literally cannot understand. That looks like their example of Hassan Ahmed Chaudhry is probably someone who learned to speak English at the age of 6, but this person cannot actually communicate in the languages that the academic requirements are in. At that point in time, these are all things that they do not engage with. That's something that I will also rehash within my issues. But then let's talk about what this debate is really about. The first thing I want to rebut is all of their practical clashes and claims, etc., on root causes. I just want to point out here one thing that is very, very important, right? They say that we're not fixing root issues in this debate. If that is genuinely their case, I'm not sure how their understanding of the debate is anything of what it's meant to be. This is literally a teacher. That is to say that they do not have the political capital, perhaps, to campaign for, like, I don't know, radically different educational policies. And I'm pretty sure that isn't going to happen soon. But at the same time, they do have the socio-economic capital that they acquired through their great determination and facing the odds, etc., to actually change this grade. This is the action that they can take in their localized community as affirmative action to help these individuals, and there is a small things of change, etc., that can actually create a long-term impact. But then, even if this is not our burden, I'll still prove how root issues are still better on our side, because they accuse us of not fixing root issues, but there is a problem solution gap on opposition. That is saying that our mechanism doesn't fix long-term issues or root causes, but also then not providing any sort of counter mechanism. If I had to posit one, I can give them one, like I can give a couple of mechanisms. For example, if these people go to institutions, higher education, etc., they finally get to go to university that isn't just a community college. Maybe they'll get, a good degree. Maybe they'll go work in a firm, etc. The fact that these people are even present within these educational institutions is extremely important, because that motivates and inspires other people from the community. Also, at the point in time that they actually start participating economically within these firms, it sets a precedent. They also then gain socio-economic capital critically that they can use en masse, they can collectivize, etc., to make sure that their voice is heard, that there's an actual systemic change. If the only problem with this debate is not even something that the actor necessarily needs to deal with, but we deal with it better, I'm not sure how they have a chance at winning this debate. But then let's talk about a couple other things in the pragmatic issue. They said that this is going to create a false sense of competence, and this child is not going to do well in their future life. I just want to posit here that their idea about how they're not going to do well in their future life, I think that's untrue. Why is that? Because people from these communities generally have a very fatalistic and defeatist attitude. At that point in time, the worst thing that you can probably do is give this person a bad grade or a few bad grades, and then they will estrange themselves from the educational system. That is usually how people from working class communities, etc., actually leave the educational system. But what would happen on our side? even if this is grade inflation, etc., the fact that your teacher cares about you, the fact that you think you have a fighting chance in a world that is rigged against you, something that you are aware of, that is going to encourage you. I think that your future life is not going to be screwed over, or you're going to radically change your practices as an individual. Why? Because these are positive incentives that actually encourage you to do better. I think at that point in time, when you see hope, when you're encouraged by your teacher, when you have capacity building mechanisms that are likely going to be there as well, because your teacher still wants to be successful. Again, your teacher is also aware of this, that you need to work harder as well. So they're probably going to compensate for that, or make sure that you actually are putting in the work. At that point in time, I think that the future life being screwed over is something that is probably not going to happen, right? And this person, even if they gain a false sense of competence for a little while, they know that they're going to have to work hard to back that, and that is going to be something that is encouraging at the end of the day. But then let's talk about other things that they said, that education is not rigged against you. They literally don't have many responses to this, right? They just say that, oh, you can still prioritize yourself, etc., in the educational system, and you can still break through. I literally do not have a response to the 6 or 7 minutes of characterization within Shiraz's speech about how the educational system is rigged against you. We really need one in second op. But then the moral issue, right? We told you that there is a principle of affirmative action. We told you that there are literal moralistic approaches that this teacher is likely to take as an independent actor to justify this action to themselves in a principled way. But also, let's clash all of this with their idea on meritocracy. First of all, what protection they posit that there's a protection of these individuals, etc. Like, I don't know, their example about Hassan or something that they need to do. I think this is protection that is not necessary. Why? Because not only are these people beneficiaries of that oppressive system, but they're complicit in these very harms. But also, I think that these people probably don't need help, or even if they're undermined in some way, which we're not doing, by the way, we're not deflating the grades of other individuals. All that we are doing is that if there are potential individuals that need this help, that are from your community, you can help them out, right? Again, you're not actively harming any other individual. The only thing that you're saying is at the start of the race has been something that's unequal. We don't want someone to start 200 meters ahead of the other person. We're going to put them in the same playing field. But then the idea of how the race is rigged comes in here. If their example is someone who's extremely privileged, these are literally legacy students, etc. These people go to preparatory colleges and stuff like that. They're fluent in English again at the age of 6, right? These are things that other people cannot do, and these are things that systemically make sure that nobody else can break through into the educational system, right? But also, I just want to weigh all of this morality, etc., against our own practical claim in terms of my positive contribution. How the alternative in educational systems is going to be no alternative. I just want to weigh some things for you in this debate. Their idea, their best case is that, oh, you might fail in later life and you might have a false sense of competence. What we're going to prove to you in this argument is that you're not going to have an educational life in the first place at the point in time that you don't have this mechanism working for you. That looks like how people within working class communities, etc., or from minority communities, how they usually operate is the fact that they feel that school, etc., is something that is a field where they cannot actually attain any sort of success. There are social statuses within society, and there are pressures that these individuals feel. But because the fact that they're underperforming, what they do is that they estrange themselves from the system. This looks like people becoming self-fulfilling prophecies. This looks like people deviating from school, etc., and forming working class subgroups, etc., like psychologists and sociologists have studied for literal centuries, right? This looks like Merton and his theory on like strain, etc., and how people actually turn towards crime because they want to elicit some sort of financial gain or some sort of social status, etc. At the point in time that the educational system deems them as something or someone that is unworthy, does not give them a second chance, they're likely to do this. That is to say that these people will probably join gangs, etc., turn towards crime, which is not something that you want. You don't want these people being deviant. But also, the reason why this is exclusively important in terms of parents, in terms of you being able to sustain an education, is that your parents are probably conservative, etc., right? There's a stigma around education within these very communities that it is useless, you should work on the farm instead, and parents are likely to pull you out of education at the point in time they're like, we're wasting money on this, or you would be much better working in a factory or taking vocational training, etc. The alternative then is no education. What we weighed all their morals against was a principle that is still unrebutted on affirmative action, on the fact that the teacher actually wants to do this for you, and they will be able to have a circle of self-justification because they're from that community, they have shared traumas and lived experiences. So proud to propose.
Thank you, Proposition 2, for that fine speech. In order to continue with the case from the opposition side, I invite opposition second speaker.
Yeah, can I take like 20 seconds?
Sure.
Panel, do I have your permission to leave? I'm like really sick. मुझे बुखार हुआ है. So can I just like come back in later?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
All right, am I good to start?
Yes.
Okay. All right, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Apparently, we have a problem solution gap. Notice how they gave me literally 16 minutes of characterization on how marginalized these communities are, but don't ever tell me how inflating one grade leads to any material change on their side of the case. But secondly, clarification before I move on to my refutations and my clashes, right? Sultan and Shiraz are hell bent on making this extreme characterization. These marginalized communities literally don't know English, and this one 6-year-old child is caring for their entire family while still attending school. I think in the vast majority of circumstances, the charitable characterization here to make would be sure these people are more marginalized than other people in their class, but they're not marginalized enough to the point where they don't have time to study or they're literally caring for so many other people. The fact that multiple people are studying in the school, the fact that there's literally a marginalized community teacher in that school, and the fact that despite their own characterization of these households generally being conservative, you are part of an educational system and not deprived of that entirely means you probably are like in a mediocre to liberal like family within those minorities, right? Now move on to like the first principle clash before like I move on to the other, right? And here's where their biggest push obviously is affirmative action. And their only response to Maspa's like contesting their idea is, hey, this is only one teacher, so they can't actually bring about tangible change. I think this one person is extremely reflective of the entire community, which is something Shiraz really said in his characterization. This means they still have a principal duty on an individual level. But essentially, in this debate, in the scope of this debate, you're essentially arguing that if one teacher should or should not do something, then all the teachers in that community should or should not be doing something. So I think the impacting still remains the same, right? I think I then tell you that there's a huge problem solution gap then on their side. Because we tell you this is a cheap solution to an extremely complicated problem. Proper addressal only comes when the system slowly recognizes that there are gaps that need to be filled in the education system in the very first. On their side, they effectively hide the issue and they never even let the child be deemed worthy and in need in the first place because simply use a cheat code to fix like on the exterior fix the problem, right? I think they substitute things like actually focusing on mobilizing people to improve the quality of education. You don't address the root cause of the issue, which is these people need access to better resources in their houses, to better learning environments, or access to better resources. Now people effectively scapegoat the problem because they think a systemic issue does not exist when minorities need systemic overhauls in the status quo and not effectively cheat codes. For example, if black schools in the 1970s never recognized that there was a fundamental issue to begin with, the teachers just began giving them grades upon grades and they never would actually realize the depth of the issue, right? Then on alternative mechanisms, these teachers should then follow with like accuse us of not giving, right? Scapegoating responsibility, what should teachers do instead? I think teachers should focus on mobilizing support since they are the most proximate to these students. They understand and relate to their systemic challenges. This means they should do things like give guidance, counseling, or provide safe spaces by encouraging these like taboo topics of conversation, etc., etc. They should actively focus on the inclusion of these people in things like after school activities or like camps with these people and actively telling other students, majoritarian students in those class to actively include those other students as well. I think it's like pushing for minority friendly changes and things like admin meetings to push parent teacher meetings or the school admin to play a more active role in the education of these children. It means mobilizing support and pushing the school system internally. Again, characterization that Maspa gave, right? But then secondly, on where the education system is better off, and here's where their only characterization literally is the education system is extremely discriminatory and teachers screw you over, right? I think even if I take one of your best and say this screw you over, that is literally reflective of reality. If you're going to be screwed over in your job as well, then I think maybe you need to be made aware of that on a school level, given these children are extremely impressionable. So they need to be made aware of the ramifications of their identity in society because it prepares them of like taking care of how they need to combat that, right? But secondly, I think even students who are like screwed over by those teachers can compensate to things like extracurriculars, etc., etc., right? But then thirdly, their idea about how the education system is meritocratic in general, right? I think, and they talk about how biases exist. I think even if that is true, this inflation of grade won't inherently be proportional to the biases that exist in society. So there is still a principal unjustification or principal harm to the other students being made here. I don't think they're taking their burden head on, right? Masava tells you like 3 or 4 things. She tells you other students noticing they're getting inferior grades, regardless of how much effort they're putting in, means they will actively inherently beat themselves upward, given they probably don't know this teacher is favoring these other students in the very first place. Given the university environment and given getting in so competitive, we think that's a very huge principal unjustification justification you're making to the vast majority of students in that class. But secondly, I think these students will find themselves failing in university, etc., when they go and realize that they don't actually know as much as they thought they did, and they realize that their school grades aren't actually reflective of the performance they're able to like bring about in unis, etc. Right? But then thirdly, I think universities, etc., where these children go realize that schools did not gauge their competence effectively, right? This means that universities are going to be inherently mistrusting of the educational system. There's going to be a lot of restlessness and a loss of faith. I think these students then inherently deserve the chance to compete fairly on our side of the case. I think there needs to be a principle addressing of the issue which does not exist in propositions model, right? Then thirdly, on where the child is better off, right? I think the child on your side feels really, really guilty, and they probably live in a constant fear of being discovered, and they probably feel like a fraud because they know that they're being given an overarching benefit that other students don't have access to, even people that could be their friends, etc., etc. So I think you lead to that exclusive harm of mental health on the children's part, given they probably are aware of the fact that the teacher is giving them this compensation in the first place, because they could probably gauge things like their own grade and realize if it's like 3 grades ahead of what they thought they did, then they'll probably like reduce over time. That's what the teacher is doing if I take them at their best. Otherwise, I think the teacher would probably just tell them that they're inflating their grades on their side, given they think it's such a huge communal responsibility. Aspects make up for it in extracurriculars, etc. Right now, they don't pursue those in their case either, right? So you lose out on those soft skills on top of the fact that they don't already retain the knowledge that the school system has tried to teach them, right? Thirdly, then these children feel like the system needs to change to accommodate them, right? Because they feel like they're too unskilled or too incapable to work within the system. I think that inherently also leads to a harm to self-esteem on their side, right? Then lastly, when these children get a free pass and they never truly learn in class, or they never get meaningful mentorship on their side of the case, I think this then means that they're unable to help other people in their generation on how to rise above those systemic issues, because that's not something they ever had to do on their side of the case. This means you're much likely to lead to worse like impacting of that systemic issue on their side when these students reach university, realize they're incompetent, realize then how much they actually had to work, realize then the false consciousness under which they've been operating. That's much likely to lead to harms. That's much likely to then like lead to harnessing of things like joining gangs, etc., which I'm really unsure where that came from, right? This means that if teachers make a more principled like conscious choice to fix all those issues, it will likely fix the defeatist or fatalist mentality a lot of those groups have, right? But then lastly, and right, teachers are inherently not fulfilling their responsibility, and this tackles their positive argumentation of giving back to community, etc., etc. I think teachers inherently have a duty to all their students. So they're essentially committing intellectual fraud on their side of the game, right? This is adverse for a number of reasons, because A, they're being paid by the state or the school, etc., etc. But secondly, it's unfair to other students, given that they could be working really, really hard and not getting enough compensation for it. There's a principal unjustification. This unique duty to your community, which these teachers are not fulfilling, can genuinely be just like helping out in other ways, like providing a safe space or sharing experiences or educating those other students in the classroom and passing on that knowledge, which is their principal duty before like duty to their community, etc., given they're literally being given monetary compensation for it. We think on all those grounds, teachers are not fulfilling their responsibility to communities. These communities are inherently worse off because they don't fix the root issue and because people aren't lied to on our side of the case.
Thank you, opposition two. And now to deliver the fifth speech from the proposition side of the house, I invite proposition's third speaker.
Can you wait for 20 seconds? Can he please wait for 20 seconds? I'll be right back.
Yeah.
I also need a minute. I'll be right.
Sure.
How was your day, Daud?
Spent the day judging an online tournament.
Ah,
Yeah.
immaculate, I presume. How do you show the timer on the top right corner of your box, by the way?
You go into the apps menu. I think this is the bottom bar on your Zoom screen. And in the apps menu, you can pull up the timer app.
Oh, fantastic. Okay.
I've become somewhat of a pro at zone.
Nice.
I'm good.
We know Shri. ठीक है. Member from opposition side, have you had your 20 seconds? Can you start now?
No, I didn't ask for it. वो असल में op 3.
Op 3 की बात.
Yeah. That is why I said opposition member.
Yes, yes.
Cool. All right, proposition 3, the floor is yours.
Yep. I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, and 1. A mother has 3 children, one of which has a, let's say, leg which is amputated. The other 2 are completely normal and completely fine. On their side of the house, what's happening is that individual does not get care. We recognize at side population that individual who is disabled needs to get more affection, needs to get, let's say, more care comparatively, simply by virtue of the fact that he is at a disadvantage. He's at a disadvantage not because of his own fault, but due to the fault of the society around him. What are the 4 strategic observations due to which opposition can never win this debate? Firstly, their alternative just makes the world a lot worse. Why is that so? Because their alternative is literally inclusion panel. I think that's like wrong for a couple of reasons. I'll go into that in a bit. But simply by virtue of the fact that the teacher could, let's say, get kicked out of power or out of her job, or simply the fact that you're like alienating these very communities within the school, etc. But then secondly, they like side opposition seems to assume that insofar as hard work is not necessarily going to be fulfilled. I'm unsure as to why that's true, because in order for that to be true, you had to prove me structural reasons and as to the probability of black people, let's say, then getting into I don't know, jobs, etc., or colleges, etc., is greater at the expense of white people not being selected. Because here's the thing, right? Insofar as structural issues would still exist, structural issues, for example, I don't know, a black person being discriminated when he goes to job, etc., all of that proves that on their side of the house, on our side of the house, hard work is still being benefited, or it is still being upheld than on our side of the house. But notice how they simply do not want to debate this debate, and a lot of their stuff is simply not a part of this debate. Because here's the thing, right? We can't solve structural issues. That's not a part of this debate. That's not a part of this debate because we're talking about the teacher in this very aspect. We tell you that the teacher does not have the capacity to, let's say, fix structural issues. That's not our burden, but she can, assure, or she can help the individual in, let's say, being a better version of himself, etc., in the very first place to begin with. Lastly, it's been 16 minutes and there's no response to our model. I know Abdullah Shah won't do it at third because he's from JT, so I am unsure as to when they will actually clash with our model argument that is substantial. If I simply weigh that up against everything that they say, I think I still win this debate pretty clearly. Okay, then what do we tell you then at prop in the very first place to begin with? And this is where I start my model flash. We tell you a couple of things. Firstly, on the principles of affirmative action, that is that you have historically favored section of the population, like white communities, etc., within the US, for example. We successfully proven as to how ethnic minorities do not have a lot of resources, how in the current status quo, you have things like racial profiling, etc. Now you have things like equality of opportunity then not being practiced then on their side of the house. The only response that I then get from on their side of the house is things like academic scholarship, etc. Hassan Ahmed Chaudhry example. We think that's a problem. Why is that so? We think that that's not true because that individual is the beneficiary of the same system that perpetuates violence on the individual that is being discriminated. So I'm unsure as to why that's justified. But secondly, that is simply unlikely to happen because of, again, structural issues. We are unsure as to why, let's say, even if an individual has a B or a, he is then likely to then go and get a better job, etc. That's not our burden. Secondly, the second response is that majority of your duties towards the you owe responsibility to the majority of people. We think that that's not true because we recognize that these people have historically been screwed up. We tell you that historically the surroundings in which these people have existed inhibit the students from becoming all that he's capable of becoming. So for instance, discrimination, for example, racial profiling, bullying, etc., that actively prevents that individual from being the best version of himself. That is important, hence you need to give them more care, etc. But then on their idea about
But then their idea within the moral, they tell you a couple of things. Firstly, on the duty of education, 3 responses. The duty of education was never to, let's say, give you an assessment, etc. It was always to uplift your social mobility, because we recognize that these sources are discriminately spread across the world. So the only way through which you can give people an equality of opportunity is by giving education the very first place to begin with. It was never, it was never giving them an honest and equal assessment. Secondly, we feel that this is the way for you to equalize. What do I mean by that? Historically, simply due to the fact that these people were, brought up due to like lottery, were brought up in like hoods, etc., or generally places that were, not that much economically productive. At this point in time, the teacher has an active option. He can step in, and she can then, sort of equalize that very historical prejudice that these people held in the very first place to begin with. But secondly, they say that you're going to have a false sense of competence. I think that's not true, because these people have these experiences lived every day. It's not as if, insofar as you give them an A, all of the problems would simply shun away. We feel that these are active life experiences. The fact that they're called out every day to go out at work, etc., is still going to exist. So we are unsure as to why you're going to have this false sense of competence. But then they say like 2 things. Firstly, on meritocracy, we think meritocracy still exists because A, you're giving them equality of opportunity, but secondly, because others are getting rewarded proportionally. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that, for example, if a white child in a, let's say, if a white child gets an A star, the probability of them then being like rewarded is the same, because again, structural problems do exist. But even if that does like decrease slightly, I'm unsure as to why that's bad. But secondly, you already have this practice largely through things like favoritism, etc. This looks like, for example, how legacies at Harvard, etc., are extremely important for admissions, but generally because teachers generally have a soft corner for many students, we are unsure as to what then the like bifurcation or what the differentiation really is. What is the way up then? We tell you that on our side of the house, this is the only way through which you can come out of the vicious cycle. We tell you that these are tightly knit communities in which others contribute to your success in the very first place to begin with. So, for example, your family, for your families, your communities, etc., because these are tightly knit. We tell you that there's inherent shared lived experience in terms of shared trauma, etc. We tell you that this individual has the position of power and the capacity to do so. Weigh that up with like I don't know meritocracy, etc. We tell you that that's being better served on our side of the house. For that reason, we think that we win the principal clash. But then secondly, onto the practical clash within this debate. We tell you a couple of things. We tell you as to how historically education is diametrically opposed to these very people. We tell you on as to how teachers screw you up. We tell you on as to how there are white patriarchal men that set the syllabus, etc., and how you're always going to be, you're not going to be considered a part of the syllabus, etc. We tell you that you have other responsibilities, etc. But secondly, I just want to prove to you, they still haven't engaged with Sultan's idea on as to how the alternative is far worse. That is no education, because of stigmatization that then leads to leads to this happening. But then the alternative then is far worse on your side of the house. The alternative then is hood culture, is gang culture, in which these people actively put a threat to their life, etc. We're not willing that to give up on our side of the house. What do they tell you within this? They tell you that firstly there needs to be fairness, etc. We feel that you're obviously still that these people are still going to have the upper hand if you're like so much wanting to rant about it. But secondly, we're the ones that are actively making it fair for them. But at second, they're like, guys, mobilization, etc., is going to happen, and this was their alternative. We feel that that's not true, because when you mobilize support, you alienate these people in the very first place to begin with. The probability of you then getting fired is greater, because I don't know, you're taking a step that is too big of a problem. If you're fired, you can never bring that change in the very first place to begin with. But then secondly, they simply say that you're going to like not have extracurriculars, etc. I'm unsure as to why that's true. But the probability of children like not being screwed up is completely false, because Shiraz characterized you at first as to how you can have smart ways through which you can, let's say, avoid this. For example, you can, I don't know, make them give more assignments, etc. You can delay their tests, etc. You can, I don't know, change their grades, etc., before sending it to the admin, etc. All of that proves that you're not jeopardizing the ability of these people to exist. But then lastly, on like the education system, we tell you that the probability of them then going into business positions of power, etc., or business opportunities, then contributes to, let's say, them uplifting the social mobility of these very communities. Insofar as that's true, they've not debated the debate, and Abdullah Shah is next. Give this debate to JT.
Thank you, Proposition 3. Just a general reminder to stick to the stipulated time limit that you have been awarded. Now to deliver the whip speech from the opposition side of the House, I invite opposition's third speaker.
Am I visible and audible to everyone? Perfect. I just need 10 seconds. Before I start my speech, I would like to say that I appreciate them hyping me up before my speech. But with that, I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, side proposition would have you believe that we do not see the loopholes within their model, that we do not see the very contradictions that they make, that we do not see exactly the sorts of issues that they have within their model. But actually, I do, and I'm going to point out to you exactly on what metrics that they're losing this debate. First of all, allow me to rebut the entirety of their case, and then I'll move on to their clashes. Right. First of all, they have a few little issues within their particular debate, which is wait a second. Where's my sheet? Share. Can my timer please be paused? Apparently, I've lost one of my sheets. There's a huge. I'm so sorry for that.
Also, is he a bit muffled for all of you? It's a little hard to listen to you. Is it possible कि आप कोई earphone पहन लो कि clearly आवाज आए?
I can try. Give me 1 second. Yes. Yeah. Am I visible now? Am I audible?
Can you
I
say
think this
something
is
more?
yeah.
Hello. Is my voice audible?
That's worse.
Yeah.
Should I just go back to that old?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want to start over again or resume from
I'm sorry,
38
I'll
seconds?
be resuming my speech if that's fine with you from that point.
Yep, that's fine with me.
Give me 1 second, I can't really hear anything. Yeah. Am I audible to everyone?
Yep.
I'll be resuming my speech in 3, 2, 1. A few issues that I have with their entire definitions, right? First of all, when they say that they're not going to do this they're going to do this indiscriminately, and that fact that this is not going to look like 4-letter grade bumps and it's not going to look like very extreme issues, right? They automatically minimize their own impacts at that very point, right? Because when they say that it's not going to be very huge to actually make a change in a student's academic report, I don't really see the very need of this action at all, right? I think that if you're just bumping them 1-letter grade or 2-letter grade up, you automatically increase your risk of getting caught, but don't really lead to any sort of mechanical change on their side of the house. But secondly, when they say that you're doing this on the basis and you're using it as a moral justification by taking their class participation into account and only extending this particular opportunity to those students who are participating in class just aren't able to get good grades for some reason, I don't think that works, because I think that the way that the current education system is established, that if you're automatically participating in class, that if you're answering questions correctly, you're automatically going to have good grades. That's the way that the O-level system works. That's the way that the high school system generally works. I don't think that that's what's going to happen. And moreover, a class participation, etc., is already integrated within the educational system. I think that that's just a truth value issue that they're saying about that. But moreover, to avoid the issue of getting caught for the teacher, what they say is that they're going to change the grades before they're submitted so that no one suspects anything. But there's still one more issue left over there. When these students get to next classes and when they're out of your particular vicinity and their teachers realize that, oh no, they don't even have a basic grasp over these particular principles that they're supposed to understand, that they're supposed to understand these basic concepts, automatically fingers are going to be raised at you that why didn't you teach to them? In fact, that being seen as something of an affirmative action that you owe to this community, that's probably going to be seen as you not doing your job properly. That increases your risk of getting fired, and that's just very, very bad in and of itself, because you are debating as the teacher, as this repeated again and again and again, right? But moreover, as an alternative, they said that they're also going to extend stuff like deadlines, deadline extensions and resubmissions and whatnot, and are also going to have lenient marking policies. Great. Why don't you just have that and stop the intellectual fraud in your model? I don't see that if you're already extending these opportunities and not changing their letter grades and are actually favoring these people, I think that you submit your affirmative action responsibility at that point, but are also not going to get fired because, hey, like you're not committing fraud or anything at that point, right? But moreover, the principal clash over here is about how they're saying that these people, because they don't have any resources and exist right now and are being discriminated by these policies, that that you owe them affirmative action. This clashes about our principle of right to fairness in education and the academic integrity. I'll address that in the principal clash. But moreover, they paint out to you how affirmative action is necessary for four major reasons, right? They give you that how you owe this responsibility to community because of limited resources, how someone did this for you. Secondly, why teachers wanting students to succeed, and thirdly, because of shared trauma, right? I get it. I think that all of these reasons make sense, but I don't think that they apply over here insofar as you're already extending deadlines, that you're already giving these students other opportunities, other benefits not available to other students. I don't think that this warrants intellectual fraud. I don't think that it warrants you changing these grades for these students just for the sake of saying that, oh no, we're making the game easier for them. You're not making the game easier for them. You're probably going to make the game harder for them if you get caught down the line, and then these universities effectively rescind their applications and whatnot because of the fact that you lied to what happened. You've already seen what happened to the past year of students at ISL. You saw what happened to that. And I don't think that I need to elaborate even more. If you're actually changing students' grades, the universities and other higher educations are probably going to take that into account and revoke these students. So any possible practical impact that you had on your side is already gone away. But moreover, they talk about how you're in a position of power, right? And we tell them that if you are in a position of power, why don't you just deal with them by extending these deadlines? That's not enough to fill that. They give POIs in the chat. I think that's a basic rule. But moreover, like there's also the reply that we have to that is because you belong to these very communities, you understand those very issues, you're better equipped to solve those particular problems, which is why you can cater to the problems of these very students without resorting to intellectual fraud, right? I think that when there's a feasibility for that, you don't necessarily owe that responsibility of committing intellectual fraud at that point. But to deal with the second argument about how education structures are inherently and intrinsically biased and discriminatory. Firstly, they say that the education is difficult now for these students. First of all, that's symmetrical for all groups. If it's difficult, it's going to be difficult for all people in that grade, not just these minorities per se, because when they do say that there is uniform education like being applied initially, they do somewhat concede to that idea that the same educational curriculum is accessible by all students. But secondly, they say that teachers are racist. I don't think that that's true, right? Given the liberal shift that you have in most liberal democracies per se, which was a part of their debate, right? I think that teachers being racist idea is very old and does not apply over here. But thirdly, them saying that textbooks are written by white supremacists, include Shakespearean knowledge whatsoever. This deals with Sultan's speech as well. I don't think that necessarily applies over here. First of all, these curriculums are diversely developed, first of all. But secondly, like middle school students don't necessarily have Shakespearean English written in their own English books. That's not necessarily difficult to understand. But moreover, they say that it's too standardized and does not cater to the needs for these students. Understand that it's too standardized for that very purpose, so that every single student can effectively learn from that particular mechanism, and so that it can cater to all groups with the same uniform education system, right? But moreover, they also say that context is also very important for these students due to issues of being expensive and whatnot, right? Then again, you can do that particular thing without committing intellectual fraud, but also about how their entire ideas of like education being rigged against these people, then again, and how that warrants affirmative action, right? But like even if this particular education system is rigged in favor of these people, then effectively changing these grades does not guarantee that there's going to be effective change on their side. Hence, that's a problem solution gap that exists within the case, right? But moreover, moving to rebutting their second argument about how these students are going to resort to gang culture and whatnot, that's symmetrical on both sides of the house, and is more symmetrical on their side of the house, because given that these students are going to face effective repercussions because of the fact that they're inevitably going to get caught, they're likely to face more severe repercussions and are going to get enveloped into that culture of like gangs and whatnot even more. I think that that's not something that they're solving on their side. They're just delaying it for it to come back and later bite you even on a more serious scale. But firstly, on a principle level, we've told you how their principle does not stand in comparison to ours, because we tell you that you owe a wider duty to society, right? At that point, we win this particular principle clash on the simple fact that we are going to like on two metrics. Firstly, that in absence of this principle, you basically fail all educational institutions. Your educational institutions don't exist. But moreover, our principle is generally more believable and practiced by more people in society. People generally believe that these institutions do play a major role to society per se, and moreover, threat of being fired exists on their side. But on a practical clash, right, you have to realize that where the students are going to be better off. We say that the students are going to be better off on our side because you're implementing effective change rather than just having some sort of weird system of giving them grades. I don't think that that's something that you should reward. Rather, that's something that you should condemn. And in fact, actually lead them to having real change on their side, which does not exist because of every single rebuttal that I've given to you. Give this debate to side opposition.
Thank you, Opposition 3, for that fine speech. And now to deliver the last words from the opposition side of the House and invite opposition's reply speaker.
Right, am I audible? One. At this point, I'm unsure what their burden is, because it seems to me like when they don't have a response for something, they say, hey, this is not what the system is better off and where systemic changes is more likely to occur, and secondly, where this individual child is better off. Firstly, then on the education system. And here's where they say, hey, it's not everything in their capacity, then we do think this is extremely relevant to the course of this debate, right? But then I think the scale of impact is extremely limited for both sides, because their principle is extremely hypocritical as well, because not every person who belongs to this minority is being taught by this one particular teacher, which means that their principal benefits or their principal harms, then they point out on our side, are extremely unsymmetrical then, because the scale of impact is lessened on both sides. This means within the scope of this debate, I will be talking about systemic change that was completely my then on another contradiction in their case, because Ahmed Kamil says, hey, structural issues will still exist on their side, hence why they can't harness things like jobs, etc. But on our side, we're giving them equality of opportunity. I think it's literally a truth value false, because systemic issues and structural issues aren't being inherently fixed immediately on either side, but we're telling you at least we have mechanisms for structural change, so in the long term it's much better off. Your side is cheat code and you never actually fix the root cause. So hey, 200 or 300 years later, our side is where Black people are likelier to get jobs. On our side, given individuals are likelier to gauge fairly where they stand, right? It gives people the wrongful idea on their side. Other majority children beat themselves up for inferior grades on our side of the case is something they never contested, besides just saying, hey, it's easier for them. Even if it is, you still discount hard work being done on their side. But thirdly, then, we tell you these people won't do as well in universities, even if they do get in, right? I think that's inherently hold something I said they never talked about. I tell you, then these people can still compensate through things like extracurriculars or simply working harder. But then, like, my plethora of alternatives is literally never contested or never talked about, right? I told you teachers should focus more then on mobilizing support, since they're very proximate to these people. They should focus on things like guidance counseling or active inclusion of these people. And beyond just saying, I think inclusion is really bad, Emma Kavi gave no response to this. I think then you push for minority friendly changes in things like admin meetings, PTCs, etc. I think teachers are inherently much better principal actors on our side of the case. But thirdly, then, teachers don't literally commit intellectual fraud on our side of the case. I think a teacher's inherent job is to reward all students fairly, not inflate anything. Again, something they never contested, even though I brought it up, right? We tell you then, these kids deserve the chance to get the system's genuine recognition. And this addressal only comes when the system recognizes the gaps that are existent within the education system. I think then there's a principal harm, because instead of helping the system recognize these faults or have things like more funds or more resource toolkits, you actively hide the issue and not recognize the need or marginalization of these communities in the very first place, right? And then lastly tell you there's harm to child on our side of the case, given they probably feel really guilty or live in constant fear of being discovered, how they can't make up for their lacking, or like the system's lacking through extracurriculars. how these children feel like they're extremely incompetent and unskilled, hence why the system needs to change, and they're not the ones who can change. But lastly, then how they're unable to make a meaningful contribution to their generations to come because they were never able to overcome systemic issues because they always had an easy way out, hence why they won't be able to contribute effectively to their children, to their like generations to come because of all those reasons and because I don't scapegoat my burden opposition.
All right, thank you, opposition reply. And now to deliver the last speech of the round from the proposition side of the House in order to sum up their case. Proposition.
Um, am I audible and visible?
You're both audible and visible.
Okay, thank you. All right. I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Critical race theory books being burned in Florida isn't a phenomenon that just happened in 1933. It's something that happened in 2024 under the government of Ron DeSantis. Affirmative action in colleges and universities for Black, Asian, and ethnic minorities, etc., has been reversed in 2023. These are things that can, in the contemporary world, exist as systemically disenfranchising these very communities. It is not only that you historically enslaved these individuals, but it is also the fact that they currently cannot attain the same social mobility that a white man could or a person of privilege. At that point in time, we are so proud to propose. But I just want to ask you a very simple question within this debate. This debate is not about the principle of education. This debate is not about fixing root issues in society or fixing the educational structure of a country. This debate is about, in your limited capacity as a goddamn high school teacher, should this teacher or not who belongs from this very community that they probably have experiences of shared trauma with, etc., that they can empathize with deeply and heavily, would they choose or not choose to inflate the grades of the student, and would that be beneficial for them or a decision that they would make, right? Sure, you can have different things that you would adjudicate that decision based on. We have rebutted, and I will talk about how we responded to those ideas, but at the end of this debate, that was what this debate was about, not all the other things that they said. For example, them saying that the principle of education really matters. I think more than the principle of education or like societal benefit or an abstract concept, they're going to have more proximal ties to the fact that, oh, blacks were literally enslaved in history. This was like conservative publication that literally said intelligence was genetic, something that they had to experience growing up, how they were consistently told that they could not move up in life, how they faced racial profiling in terms of university admissions, in terms of their job. They have been traumatized by these very experiences, and they empathize deeply with that student at that point in time. If that is the characterization that was never rebutted by side opposition, I don't think they have a shot at winning this debate. But then let's talk about the things that were applicable in this debate. They said a couple of things that are applicable. I'll give them credit for that. That you might have a false sense of importance, you might fail later, etc. Teacher advocacy could be something that happens. Meritocracy or equality of meritocracy is something that you should value as a teacher. I'll tell you how we engage with these things. I'll tell you how we took them down. But also when I weigh those up against the benefits that we provide, how they are unimportant in the face of those. Firstly, just in the sense that, oh, education is not systemically discriminatory, in fact, and this is something that they just try to counter assert, but they say that the reason why you should not inflate this grade is because they might fail later or they might have a false sense of competence. We rebutted this in multiple ways, right? We told you, number one, positive incentives and positive determination is probably the one thing that these people need. They will work harder at the point in time. If they feel that they are being valued in the classroom, they will not absent themselves from school, etc. They will not exchange themselves from the educational system. But also the plethora of harms that exist when you don't encourage them or when they feel that they cannot succeed and they turn towards alternatives. Number one, they become a self-fulfilling prophecy and they have very fatalistic sentiments. But they literally join things like gangs, etc. Right? They turn towards deviance and crime, etc., because they feel that that is how they will elicit status from society. That is how they will acquire wealth, etc. The fact that their parents will literally pull them out of school if they do not show educational improvement, right? The reason why the teacher knows this is because they are from the same community. They are the same conservative parents. They are the same stigma around education within that black neighborhood, etc. And that is why they're going to be able to empathize. That is why they will do this. I think the racist bigotry from side opposition is very harmful. They say work harder. They say this will prepare you for life. I think that's unimportant important at the point in time that you will literally not have a career, at the point in time that you will literally join a criminal gang and your life will be ruined. I think that's something that shouldn't happen, because education is systemically discriminatory. We'll go give you structural reasons that we're left unengaged with. But also, the individuals they protect, they are beneficiaries of the system. The only reason Hassan Ahmed Chaudhry, the one example, is a contender for the scholarship is because of his privileged circumstance and socialization as a kid. The same, those are individuals that the race is rigged for, right? The fact that they're a candidate is inherently a rigging of the system. Like the race is rigged for legacy admissions. Ethnocentric syllabi exists. There's a white lens. There are elaborated codes, etc., that you don't understand. The English language, which most people might not understand as fluently, or preparatory schools. All of these things mean that not only will this teacher feel a strong moral responsibility, independent of the practical consequences, but there are harms in terms of, this student is going to feel fearful. We literally mitigated those harms at first when we give you a characterization of how you're actually going to do this in very safe ways. The reason why ISL kids get caught is because they change their transcripts at the end. You just change them beforehand, and that's how you would submit. That's the grades that you submit to the administration. So again, that's not going to happen. These teachers are not that stupid, and it's a very limited set of people that they are going to be talking about. So yes, for all those reasons, clearly proposition.
Thank you, Proposition Reply, and thank you to all the speakers involved in this debate from both sides of the House. Truly wonderful, insightful debate to witness and not just adjudicate. Tika, you will get enough to say in the main hall, so please leave the